Camera's rolling. And we got audio going. All right. To any potential listeners ever, should there ever be any, my name is Chris Lopez. This is my imitation project. I am recording a podcast on the theme of the epistolary. Today's guest is Austin Sean.
Nice to meet you. To anyone who's watching.
Okay. I could start you off with a crossword clue. It was a epistolary Jane Austen. Epistolary Jane Austen, published in 1871. No guesses?
I have not heard of it, no.
Yeah, me neither. The answer is Lady Susan. Alright. So, start with you off. Do you know what epistolary is?
No, I do not.
Alright. So, my understanding of epistolary is that it refers to anything that is, it's like a written correspondence. So it's letters between, lovers or friends or whatever. Like, that is the ideal epistolary, but then it could also move on to different media in the form of email or maybe a text message. So the title of our course is actually epistolary text from the 1700s to sliding into DMs, something like that. So I guess the first question on the docket is, do you think that music can be epistolary? In the sense that maybe Taylor Swift is addressing her audience, dear listener, or dear reader.
Yes, I do believe that music can be very epistolary in that sense.
Nothing to build off that.
No, okay. I think my taste in music has always been music with like a lot of meaning behind it. So typically, like an artist's like peak, they will have like a type of song that really reaches out towards like a very large pool of an audience, right? So, drawing a blank.
For whatever it means, I do agree. I believe but most music nowadays tends to be, I feel, epistolary in the sense that they're either most popular music nowadays tends to be addressing a lover, or in the case of many of the rap artists, they tend to be addressing their audience, giving kind of like a blueprint into how to live their life,
I agree with that. I feel like rappers, their audience usually tends to be like possibly another gang or trying to show themselves off to an audience, like kind of display their lifestyle.
Yeah. And on the theme of rappers, because rappers so commonly die. I mean, even last week, Takeoff was shot over a minor inconvenience. You're familiar with XXX Tentacion and Mac Miller?
Yes.
So, following their deaths, respectively 2018 and 2019, their estates have been publishing music posthumously. Right. And so, how do you feel about post-mortem publishing?
I do feel like it's almost like a theft of someone's personal information, because they themselves have not published it yet and made it public to everyone. It doesn't really make sense for someone else to take over it. At that point, it becomes like a tarnished piece of personal belonging.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Now, oh man, I should write this down because I want to kind of divert from that, but also go off of that. Now my mind is drawing a blank as I picked up the pencil. But, so you feel it's a tarnished piece. Okay.
mean, but where does that line end? Because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could be a personal belonging, but at the same time, that person is no longer alive. So
Exactly.
that does bring up a lot of talking points, I feel like. Because when you do have... I mean, at what point does a personal belonging become the belongings of others?
Exactly.
Right? So, I mean, someone could die. And then, of course, those possessions are, like, reallocated.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point can, let's say, like, recordings be allocated? Right?
So I'm going to actually pivot towards the epistolary now. Do you ever feel that there is maybe like X amount of time before it becomes okay to publish? So Franz Kafka, he was a Czech-born, he was born in Prague and then later died in Prague.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote a letter to his father.
Mm-hmm.
And it got intercepted by his mother, so his father never actually got to read it.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote that letter in 1919. He passed in 1924,
Mm-hmm.
and it was published in 1952. So there, between the time of writing is 33 years, the time of death is 28 years. Do you feel that there's a point where it becomes okay to publish someone else's work?
Well, I feel like that's a very interesting topic because once something becomes older, it becomes less important to certain people. But without certain rules being put into action, I feel like it will never have a... I mean, because you can always have, like, personal feelings in something, right? And then that can affect it a lot, but I feel like having a more set and permanent legal rule will allow for a better... like supervision of the idea.
So I'm gonna pick apart something you said. You said that over time some things become less important to people. So in Kafka's case, he died, right? He died without his father ever getting to know how his father's name was Herman. So he died without Herman getting to know how Franz Kafka felt. In that case, who does the text become unimportant to? Because it can't be Kafka. Kafka's gone.
Yeah.
And who gets to deem the importance of a lost one's belongings?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I do feel like I feel like there should be a respect for that person who passed, but without that person being there, how exactly do you regulate it? And I'm not actually sure how that could happen. Yeah.
Do you feel that maybe a person's actions in their life can deem it acceptable for them to publish something on their behalf when they pass? And I ask you this with a specific example. Where did I put that book? So we actually read in class an email correspondence between two lovers. It's I'm Very Into You by Kathy Acker and Mackenzie Wark, both of which were authors in the 90s. So the correspondence is between 1995 and 96. Kathy Acker has since passed, and they published it after her death. And so there's lines in here where they say quite vulgar and really just
Explicit.
explicit and extremely personal things. Like this is on page 24. This is from Kathy Acker. It goes, I tongue kiss her a lot. All my animals are very penetrable, including my feral motorcycles. And there's other things. Like on the first page, we hear things, but I certainly won't forget that I enjoyed being with you, the shared intimacies of body, mind, and spirit. It's such a fleeting thing, so singular. And I think we're probably both pretty solitary in our own ways. But for a slice at a time, we were singular together. There are no words. I just want to say there are no words. I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you came. And so, Kathy Acker actually did a film with Alan Sondheim in which Sondheim gives a monologue, and Kathy Acker goes down on him and blows him on screen. Well, out of frame, but you can kind of tell. And so, do actions like that justify maybe publishing something like this, where it's a little more personal and more private?
Well, I mean, just because someone decides to do something like that on film, I don't feel like is a good reason to be giving out other pieces of information. Just because there's connections between them doesn't necessarily mean that the person who passed feels the same way about those two issues or two different scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could have very different feelings going into each other, because on one hand, where do we draw the similarities? Like, so between her and the person who said he was doing the monologue, that could be something like physical rather than the emotional transactions that Kathy Acker had between her and who was it?
Alan Sondheim.
Alan Sondheim.
I'm going to read you an excerpt from... Oh, shoot. Who wrote this? Joe Livingstone. She wrote an article of... it's called... I love coming home to your message, or something like that. It's a criticism of this. And so it goes, for what it's worth, the publisher, or not the publisher, the executor, Matthias Vienginer, said, and I quote, Acker would have never agreed to their publication were she alive, but she is dead. And so, unfortunately for her, as someone who knew her, as assumingly Matthias did, they'll never get to know, or well, I guess it went behind her back. But Livingstone says, Vienginer says that the publication of these emails is specifically interesting because Acker was a confessional female author who made her sexual life into her work. This is a red herring. Kathy Acker spat on the line in the sand that divided the apolitical private action from the political public work, and made that spat on line the work itself. But this habit does not constitute a feminist pretext for mining her private correspondence. Perhaps Acker should have seen it coming if she was so smart. People have always liked to nose around in other people's love letters. Think of Vita Sackville West's outrageously gorgeous letters to the Violet Trephysis, or James Joyce's frantic notes to Nora. Nobody wants their dirty laundry aired while they're alive, but it isn't exactly unprecedented for it to get stuck in a book once everybody's safely dead. We like to root around in the most salacious private letters that scholarship can unearth. So would email ever have been thought to be off limits? And this, for the time, and probably one of the only, this is entirely email. And so it's laid out, like you can see every email.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah, how do you feel about what I just read you? Livingstone kind of says, maybe you should have seen it coming.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing to see it coming, and then it's also, you never know when you're gonna die. You never know when you're gonna pass away. Perhaps, although she does make confessional things, maybe she comes to terms with it before she publishes it. So, having something that maybe she possibly had not come to terms with, in the sense that she's okay with having it publicized out to the public, it could potentially be a breach into a part of her life that she didn't want to have let out to everyone, right?
Mm.
Because obviously we have access to this book.
Mm.
If she were alive, and she had been alive for a while now, it's possible that this could not even be out right now.
Mm.
So, I do feel like there is a certain boundary that has been passed with this circumstance.
I'm trying to pivot back to Kafka. Honestly, I just want to read what he wrote, because what he wrote is so incredibly intimate and personal. But I fall in love too easily, Chipping. In Kafka's case, his letters had an intended audience that was just never reached. It was intercepted, and does the intent to have your work read change anything? Like, that was a really broad question. Let me rephrase. Kafka wanted his father to read his letter, and he never got that chance.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm trying to go with that, but I guess, does it sort of make it okay?
Well, I think the question you're trying to ask is, does the audience targeted have a certain effect on whether something should be published or not?
Yeah.
I think regardless of audience, I feel as if it still is someone's personal belongings, right? So this can either be like maybe we could call it like a personal belonging. It's like a part of someone's memory, right? That they laid out onto a piece of paper. And just because it's been put into physical form doesn't necessarily mean that, just like the rest of their belongings, it could be just thrown out or used as something to publicize. So in Kafka's case, where that letter was intercepted, I feel as if that a certain level of theft happened, because he obviously did have an audience, and there could have been something extremely important to him personally that was in that letter. Yeah. So I feel like this all goes down to like almost as theft or stealing of a person's personal like emotions, right?
I agree. Yeah. It's a lot of gray area, but for the most part, I would not want my emails or text messages or my correspondences aired out. But at a certain point, are you ever depriving the world of the next great?
Yeah. Then possibly there's like maybe a great scientist whose notes have just not been looked into fully, and then potentially there are like technological advances that we have not been able to make because of this crucial piece of detail that has not been publicized. So although those still could potentially make the world better, I feel like there is a certain moral perspective to this, where it is someone's personal thoughts, it's their belongings, it's something that they kept in their brain. And although it was, again, turned into physical form, it doesn't make sense to just publish it knowing that the world could be better, right? Because there are possibly like intentions that the person had behind it. I don't feel like as soon as someone dies, their opinion doesn't matter anymore. I feel like their opinion should still matter. And to just completely disregard that after someone passes is in some way a moral irresponsibility.
I think that is a good place to end it off. Dear reader, or dear listener rather, should you ever listen to this, think about that, maybe respond. Thank you. That is guest Austin Sean on tonight's podcast. Thank you very much.